I stood in the marble foyer of what used to be my family's empire, watching my brother-in-law Marcus pack his personal belongings into cardboard boxes. 24 hours ago, he was the CEO. Today, he was unemployed, disgraced, and facing federal charges. My sister Catherine sat crying in the corner. Her designer dress wrinkled, her perfect world shattered. They had mocked my autistic son's dream of becoming an engineer, called him worthless, a burden I should hide away. They never imagined that their cruelty would cost them everything. Hey everyone! Before we dive into this incredible revenge story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments. If you're ready for a family drama that'll have you questioning everything you know about loyalty and justice, smash that like button and hit subscribe because this story has more twists than a pretzel factory. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when a mother's love meets calculated revenge. 6 months earlier, my world looked completely different. I was still the quiet sister-in-law, the one who brought casseroles to family dinners and smiled politely while my husband's family made their cutting remarks about my 12-year-old son, Jamie. My husband, David, had died 3 years prior in a car accident, leaving me to navigate his wealthy, influential family alone. The Harrington Construction Company had been built by David's father, and now his brother Marcus ran the multi-million-dollar operation with an iron fist. Jamie had always been different. Diagnosed with autism at age 4, he saw the world through a unique lens that most people couldn't understand. While other kids played video games, Jamie studied building blueprints and engineering marvels. He could tell you the exact specifications of the Golden Gate Bridge, or explain why certain architectural designs withstand earthquakes better than others. To me, he was brilliant. To the Harrington family, he was an embarrassment. The breaking point came during Marcus's 50th birthday party at the country club. Jamie had been excited all week preparing a presentation about sustainable building materials he thought would interest his uncle. He had created detailed drawings and research notes, spending hours perfecting every detail. When he approached Marcus during dinner, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. I felt so proud of my son's courage. "Uncle Marcus," Jamie said, his voice clear and confident. "I've been studying green architecture, and I think Harrington Construction could save millions by implementing these eco-friendly materials in your residential projects." The entire table fell silent. Marcus looked at Jamie with barely concealed disgust, then burst into laughter. "Kids stick to playing with your toy blocks. Real construction is for people who understand the real world, not fantasy land." Catherine joined in, her voice dripping with condescension. "Honestly, Sarah, you should focus on getting Jamie proper help instead of filling his head with impossible dreams. He'll never be capable of real work." My face burned with humiliation, but it was Jamie's expression that broke my heart. The light in his eyes dimmed, and he quietly gathered his papers, retreating to his seat without another word. That night, I found him in his room, his carefully prepared presentation torn into pieces, tears streaming down his face. "Mom," he whispered, "am I really too stupid to be an engineer?" That question ignited something fierce inside me. I had tolerated their cruelty toward me for years, but attacking my son crossed a line I couldn't ignore. I began to pay closer attention to family conversations, business dealings, and financial discussions I had previously tuned out. What I discovered made my blood run cold. During a casual conversation at Sunday dinner, I overheard Marcus talking to his wife about offshore accounts and tax shelters. He mentioned moving company funds to avoid unnecessary government scrutiny and bragged about inflating construction costs on city contracts. My late husband had always handled our family's finances, but I wasn't as naive as they assumed. I had a business degree from Northwestern and had worked in accounting before Jamie was born. I started documenting everything. Every conversation, every suspicious transaction I could access through David's old business accounts, every hint of illegal activity. Marcus had been embezzling funds from the company for years, skimming money from government contracts, and hiding assets in foreign accounts. He had also been bribing city officials to secure lucrative construction deals, inflating costs by 30% and pocketing the difference. The most shocking discovery came when I found David's old laptop in our attic. His email account was still active, and I discovered correspondence between him and Marcus from months before David's death. David had uncovered the embezzlement scheme and threatened to expose Marcus unless he stopped immediately. The final email sent just days before David's accident was chilling. "Marcus, I won't let you destroy everything Dad built. Either you confess to the board or I will." My hands shook as I read Marcus's response. "David, you always were too noble for your own good. Sometimes accidents happen to people who don't mind their own business." The implication hit me like a physical blow. Had Marcus orchestrated David's death? The police had ruled it an accident, black ice on a mountain road. But now I wondered if there was more to the story. I couldn't prove murder, but I could prove fraud, embezzlement, and bribery. And I intended to use every piece of evidence to destroy the man who had destroyed my family's life. Armed with months of evidence, I knew I needed to be strategic. One wrong move, and Marcus would cover his tracks, potentially destroying evidence and silencing witnesses. I needed allies, but I also needed to maintain the element of surprise. The first person I approached was Elena Rodriguez, the company's head accountant who had worked with David for over 15 years. I invited Elena for coffee, choosing a quiet cafe far from the office building. She had always been kind to Jamie and me, often asking about his interests and encouraging his love of engineering. When I showed her the financial documents I had discovered, her face went pale. "Sarah, I suspected something was wrong, but I never imagined it was this extensive," Elena whispered, studying the offshore account statements. "Marcus has been pressuring me to sign off on questionable expenses, but I always assumed they were legitimate business costs." Elena revealed that Marcus had been forcing her to falsify records, threatening her job and immigration status if she refused to comply. She was a single mother supporting her elderly parents, and Marcus had exploited her vulnerability ruthlessly. With her inside knowledge of the company's financial systems, Elena became my most valuable ally. Next, I reached out to Detective Ray Thompson, a family friend who had investigated David's accident. When I presented him with the evidence of Marcus's criminal activities and shared my suspicions about David's death, he agreed to quietly reopen the investigation. Ray had always been bothered by inconsistencies in the accident report, particularly the fact that David's car had been found with its brakes tampered with, a detail that had been overlooked in the initial investigation. My third ally was completely unexpected: Thomas Harrington III. Marcus's own son contacted me after overhearing a heated phone conversation between his father and a city official about bribes and contract manipulation. Thomas was a recent law school graduate who had joined the family firm with dreams of honest success, only to discover his father's corruption. The revelation had been eating at him for months. "Aunt Sarah," Thomas said during our secret meeting, "I can't stand by and watch him destroy everything Grandpa built. This company employed hundreds of people who trusted us to do right by them and their families." With my team assembled, we developed a comprehensive plan. Elena would copy all financial records and internal communications while maintaining her normal routine. Detective Thompson would gather additional evidence about the bribery scheme and investigate the circumstances of David's death more thoroughly. Thomas would document any illegal activities he witnessed and secretly record conversations with his father. The plan required perfect timing. We needed to ensure that all evidence was secured before Marcus could destroy it, and we needed to coordinate with federal authorities to prevent him from fleeing the country. I discovered that Marcus had been making regular trips to Switzerland, ostensibly for business, but likely to manage his hidden assets. 3 weeks into our operation, we hit our first major breakthrough. Elena discovered that Marcus was planning to transfer $15 million to a Swiss account within the next week, coinciding with a major city contract payout. This was our chance to catch him in the act of embezzlement with undeniable proof. Detective Thompson coordinated with the FBI's white-collar crime unit, and they agreed to monitor the financial transfers while gathering additional evidence. Thomas managed to record a conversation where Marcus bragged about bribing City Councilman Robert Hayes to secure a $50 million infrastructure contract, providing the smoking gun we needed for the bribery charges. The most emotionally difficult part of our investigation came when I had to maintain normalcy with Catherine and the rest of the family. Every Sunday dinner became an exercise in acting smiling politely, while Marcus made his cruel jokes about Jamie and discussed his business dealings with arrogant confidence. Catherine continued her pattern of subtle cruelty, making comments about my parenting and Jamie's future prospects that cut deep every time. During one particularly painful dinner, Marcus announced that he was considering expanding the business internationally, potentially moving operations overseas for tax advantages. The casual way he discussed defrauding the government while sitting in his luxurious dining room surrounded by wealth built on stolen money made me physically ill. Jamie, meanwhile, had been quietly working on his engineering projects, undeterred by his family's dismissal. He had started attending a special program for gifted students with autism, where his talents were recognized and nurtured. Watching him regain his confidence and pursue his passion gave me the strength to continue our dangerous game. The night before our plan would be executed, I sat in Jamie's room watching him work on a scale model of a suspension bridge. His focus and dedication reminded me why I was willing to risk everything to protect him and ensure justice was served. "Mom," Jamie said without looking up from his project. "I know Uncle Marcus doesn't think I'm smart, but I'm going to prove him wrong someday. I'm going to build things that help people and make the world better." "You already are, sweetheart," I told him, meaning every word. "You're going to change the world, and anyone who can't see that is missing out on something incredible." The next morning, our carefully orchestrated plan would begin, and the Harrington family would never be the same. The morning of our operation, I woke before dawn with nervous energy coursing through my veins. Elena had spent the previous evening copying the final batch of incriminating financial records, while Thomas had successfully recorded Marcus discussing his plans to move additional funds offshore. Detective Thompson confirmed that the FBI surveillance team was in position to monitor the Swiss bank transfers scheduled for that afternoon. Our first challenge came unexpectedly, when Catherine announced she would be visiting the office that morning to discuss charity fundraising plans with Marcus. This complicated our timeline significantly, as Elena needed access to Marcus's private office to retrieve the physical evidence we had identified. I had to think quickly to keep Catherine away from the building. I called Catherine with a fabricated emergency, telling her that Jamie had been in an accident at school and needed to be taken to the hospital immediately. The lie made me uncomfortable, but it was necessary to protect our operation. Catherine, despite her cruel treatment of Jamie, still maintained appearances of family concern and agreed to meet me at the hospital instead of going to the office. While Catherine spent 2 hours in a hospital waiting room learning that Jamie's accident was actually a misunderstanding, Elena was systematically documenting every piece of evidence in Marcus's office. She photographed financial statements, copied computer files, and even discovered a second set of books that Marcus kept hidden in a safe behind his desk. Thomas had provided the combination which he had observed his father entering during late-night office visits. The evidence Elena uncovered exceeded our wildest expectations. Marcus had been operating multiple schemes simultaneously, embezzling from construction contracts, accepting bribes from material suppliers, and even skimming from the company's employee pension fund. The total amount stolen over the past 5 years exceeded $25 million money that belonged to hardworking employees and taxpayers. Detective Thompson's investigation into David's death had also yielded disturbing results. The brake tampering had been expertly done, and security footage from a nearby gas station showed Marcus's car in the area on the morning of David's accident. While we still couldn't prove murder conclusively, the circumstantial evidence was compelling enough for the district attorney to consider charges. Our next ally emerged from an unexpected source. Margaret Harrington, Marcus's own mother, and the family matriarch, had been growing suspicious of her son's lavish spending and secretive behavior. When she discovered that he had been stealing from the pension fund, money that was supposed to secure the retirement of employees who had worked for the company for decades. She was furious. Margaret contacted me directly, having heard through family gossip about Jamie's mistreatment at Marcus's birthday party. She was a sharp woman in her 70s who had helped build the company alongside her late husband, and she had always been fond of David and sympathetic toward Jamie's challenges. "Sarah, dear," Margaret said during our clandestine meeting at her garden club. "I've suspected Marcus was up to something for months. The company books don't add up, and he's been buying properties and cars that cost more than his salary should allow. I want to know what you've discovered." I showed Margaret a carefully selected portion of our evidence focusing on the pension fund theft and contract fraud. Her reaction was immediate and decisive. As the majority shareholder of Harrington Construction, Margaret had the power to remove Marcus from his position and cooperate fully with law enforcement. "That boy has betrayed everything his father and I worked to build," Margaret said, her voice shaking with rage. "And the way he's treated your Jamie is unforgivable. A child's dreams should be nurtured, not crushed by small-minded adults who lack vision and compassion." Margaret's involvement transformed our operation from a risky investigation into a family uprising. She agreed to call an emergency board meeting for the following week, where she would formally remove Marcus as CEO and hand over all evidence to federal investigators. This gave us the legal authority we needed to ensure Marcus couldn't destroy evidence or flee the country. Thomas struggled with the emotional weight of betraying his father, but his commitment to justice remained firm. He had discovered additional evidence of Marcus bribing building inspectors to overlook safety violations, putting construction workers and future building occupants at risk. This discovery solidified Thomas's resolve to see his father face consequences for his actions. "I became a lawyer to uphold justice," Thomas told me during one of our strategy sessions. "I can't stand by and watch him endanger innocent people while stealing money that could fund schools and hospitals. Jamie deserves better than the treatment he's received, and our employees deserve better than having their retirement savings stolen." Elena faced the greatest personal risk in our operation. As the company's head accountant, she could face criminal charges if prosecutors decided she was complicit in the fraud. Detective Thompson assured us that her cooperation would be viewed favorably, but the stress was taking a toll on her health and family life. "My daughter starts college next year," Elena confided during one of our meetings. "I've been saving for her education for 15 years, and now I might lose everything because I was too scared to stand up to Marcus earlier." I promised Elena that I would help her family regardless of the legal outcome. Margaret had also privately committed to ensuring that Elena received legal protection and financial support in exchange for her crucial testimony. This woman had been trapped in an impossible situation, forced to choose between her family's security and her moral principles. Our final ally was the most surprising of all. Jessica Walsh, an investigative journalist from the city newspaper, had been researching corruption in municipal construction contracts for months. When Detective Thompson discreetly reached out to her, she immediately recognized the significance of our case. Jessica's investigation had independently identified several suspicious patterns in city contracting processes, and our evidence provided the missing pieces she needed to expose the entire corruption network. She agreed to delay publication until after law enforcement had secured all evidence and made arrests, but her involvement guaranteed that the story would receive comprehensive media coverage. The complexity of our alliance network required careful coordination. We established secure communication channels, scheduled regular strategy meetings, and developed contingency plans for various scenarios. Margaret proved to be an excellent strategist, drawing on decades of business experience to anticipate Marcus's potential responses. As the day of reckoning approached, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this point. 6 months earlier, I had been a grieving widow, trying to protect my son from family cruelty. Now I was leading a coalition dedicated to exposing corruption and ensuring justice for multiple victims. Jamie remained unaware of the full scope of our activities, but he had noticed positive changes in my confidence and attitude. His own progress in the engineering program continued to exceed expectations. and he had begun designing sustainable housing prototypes that impressed his instructors. The night before our final confrontation, I tucked Jamie into bed and listened as he excitedly described his latest project. A bridge design that could withstand both earthquakes and hurricanes while using recycled materials. "Mom, do you think I'll really become an engineer someday?" He asked the same question that had started this entire journey. "I know you will, sweetheart," I replied with absolute certainty. "And when you do, you'll show everyone that dreams are worth fighting for, no matter what anyone else believes about what's possible." The emergency board meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning, but our carefully constructed plan began to unravel on Tuesday evening. I received a frantic call from Elena, her voice trembling with fear and barely controlled panic. "Sarah, we have a problem," she whispered into the phone. "Marcus knows. Someone told him about our investigation, and he's been asking me questions about missing financial documents. He's suspicious, and I think he's going to move the money tonight instead of waiting until Friday." My heart sank as the implications hit me. If Marcus transferred the funds early, we would lose our best evidence of active embezzlement. Worse, if he suspected the full scope of our investigation, he might destroy documents, intimidate witnesses, or even flee the country before we could present our case to the board. Who could have told him? I asked, my mind racing through our small circle of allies. "I don't know, but he mentioned something about family loyalty and blood being thicker than water," Elena replied. "Sarah, I'm scared. He called me into his office this afternoon and asked very specific questions about accounting procedures and document security protocols." I immediately contacted Detective Thompson, who confirmed our worst fears. The FBI surveillance team had observed unusual activity at Marcus's home and office, suggesting he was preparing to execute some kind of contingency plan. Financial monitoring showed preliminary steps toward moving funds, but no actual transfers had occurred yet. The next morning, I discovered the source of our leak in the most painful way possible. Thomas called me, his voice heavy with guilt and anguish, to confess that he had inadvertently revealed our investigation to his father. "Aunt Sarah, I made a terrible mistake," Thomas said, barely able to speak through his emotions. "I thought I was being careful, but Dad saw me copying files from his computer. When he confronted me, I panicked and told him I was gathering evidence because I was concerned about legal liability for the company." My stomach dropped as Thomas continued his confession. He pressured me for details, and I mentioned that you had raised questions about financial irregularities. I didn't tell him about Elena or Detective Thompson, but I think he figured out that you were investigating him. The betrayal stung deeply, not because I believed Thomas was malicious, but because his inexperience had potentially doomed our entire operation. I had trusted a young man who lacked the emotional fortitude to withstand pressure from his manipulative father. "Thomas, what exactly did you tell him?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the panic rising in my chest. "I told him that you had found some concerning financial documents among David's belongings, and that you were worried about the company's legal exposure," Thomas admitted. He seemed relieved when I framed it as a concern for the business rather than a criminal investigation. I realized that Marcus likely believed I was conducting a naive amateur investigation rather than coordinating with law enforcement. This misconception might actually work in our favor, but it also meant we needed to accelerate our timeline dramatically. The situation became even more complicated when Catherine called me that evening, her voice cold and accusatory. "Sarah, Marcus tells me you've been snooping through David's old business papers and making wild accusations about financial impropriety," she said with barely concealed disdain. "This obsessive behavior isn't healthy for you or Jamie. Maybe it's time you considered grief counseling instead of playing detective." Catherine's dismissive tone revealed something crucial Marcus had told her about my investigation, but he had characterized it as the desperate actions of an unstable widow, rather than a serious threat. This gave me an idea for how to proceed without alerting him to the full scope of our operation. I decided to lean into Marcus's underestimation of my capabilities. When he called me the next day requesting a family meeting to discuss my concerns, I agreed, readily playing the role of the confused widow who had stumbled across information she didn't fully understand. The meeting took place in Marcus's office with Catherine present as a witness. I brought a small selection of the financial documents, carefully choosing items that were concerning, but not immediately damning. My strategy was to make Marcus believe he had successfully intimidated me into backing down, while actually gathering intelligence about his defensive measures. "Sarah, I understand you found some old business documents that worried you," Marcus said in a patronizing tone that made my skin crawl. "But you have to understand that complex business transactions often look suspicious to people who don't have experience in corporate finance." I played my role perfectly, allowing him to explain away obvious discrepancies and pretending to be reassured by his condescending explanations. Catherine reinforced his narrative, suggesting that my investigation was a symptom of unresolved grief and encouraging me to focus on Jamie's needs instead of business matters I couldn't comprehend. "You're absolutely right," I said, forcing myself to sound grateful for their guidance. I was probably reading too much into normal business practices. "I'm sorry for causing unnecessary worry." Marcus relaxed visibly, clearly believing he had successfully neutralized the threat I posed. He even made a show of generosity, suggesting that he increased Jamie's college fund and offering to arrange internships for him at construction sites when he was older. "Family takes care of family, Sarah," Marcus said with what he probably thought was a warm smile. "David would have wanted us to look after you and Jamie, and that's exactly what we're going to do." What Marcus didn't realize was that I had recorded our entire conversation using a device Detective Thompson had provided. His patronizing explanation of financial discrepancies actually created additional evidence of his awareness and intent to deceive. More importantly, his offer to increase Jamie's college fund using what I knew to be stolen money demonstrated his continued criminal activity. After the meeting, I contacted Margaret to update her on the situation. She was furious about Thomas's inadvertent betrayal, but impressed by my strategic response. "You handled that beautifully, dear," Margaret said with grudging admiration. "Marcus always was arrogant enough to believe he was the smartest person in any room. He has no idea what he's dealing with." Elena's situation had become precarious after Marcus's increased scrutiny, so we decided to extract her from the office environment temporarily. Margaret arranged for Elena to take emergency family leave, ostensibly to care for a sick relative, which gave her legitimate cover for being absent during the final phase of our operation. Detective Thompson accelerated his coordination with federal authorities, and we moved the board meeting up to Monday morning. Margaret used her influence to ensure that all board members would be present, including several independent directors who had been growing concerned about the company's recent financial performance. The weekend before our confrontation, I spent quiet time with Jamie, knowing that our lives were about to change dramatically regardless of the outcome. He had been accepted into an advanced summer engineering program at the local university, and his excitement about the opportunity filled me with pride and determination. "Mom, I've been working on something special," Jamie said on Sunday evening, showing me detailed blueprints for a community center design that incorporated sustainable materials and accessibility features. "I want to show it to Uncle Marcus at the next family dinner. Maybe if he sees how much I've learned, he'll change his mind about me." My heart broke knowing that there would never be another family dinner with Uncle Marcus, at least not in the way Jamie imagined. But I also felt fierce pride in my son's resilience and continued faith in the goodness of people, even those who had treated him cruelly. "Jamie, no matter what happens this week, I want you to remember that your dreams are valid and your talents are real," I told him, pulling him close. "Some people aren't capable of seeing brilliance when it comes in a different package than they expect, but that doesn't make you any less extraordinary." As I tucked him into bed that night, I knew that the next 48 hours would determine not just Marcus's fate, but the future of everyone connected to Harrington Construction. The betrayal within our alliance had complicated our plans, but it had also revealed the depth of Marcus's arrogance and his willingness to continue his criminal activities even when he suspected he was being watched. Tomorrow would bring justice one way or another. Monday morning arrived with unseasonable storm clouds gathering over the city, as if nature itself was preparing for the tempest about to be unleashed in the Harrington Construction boardroom. I arrived at the office building 30 minutes early, my heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and terror. Margaret had arranged for me to have access to the conference room to prepare materials, and Detective Thompson had positioned federal agents throughout the building in case Marcus attempted to flee or destroy evidence. The first surprise of the day came when I discovered that Jessica Walsh, the investigative journalist, had uncovered additional evidence that perfectly complemented our investigation. Her independent research into municipal corruption had revealed that Marcus's bribery network extended far beyond what we had initially discovered. She had documentation of kickbacks involving 3 city council members, 2 building inspectors, and a municipal contracts administrator. "Sarah, what your investigation uncovered was just the tip of the iceberg," Jessica explained as she showed me photographs and financial records. Marcus has been operating a systematic corruption scheme for at least 7 years, and the total amount of stolen taxpayer money exceeds $50 million. This revelation meant that Marcus was facing potential federal charges that could result in decades in prison, rather than the few years we had initially anticipated. The scope of his crimes was so extensive that he had essentially turned Harrington Construction into a criminal enterprise disguised as a legitimate business. My hands shook as I reviewed Jessica's evidence, particularly documents showing that Marcus had used stolen money to purchase luxury properties in his children's names, effectively laundering proceeds from his crimes through family members who might have been unaware of the source of their sudden wealth. The second major development came from an unexpected source, Marcus's personal attorney, Richard Sterling, who contacted Margaret directly that morning with shocking information. "Mrs. Harrington, I need to speak with you urgently about your son's recent activities," Sterling had told Margaret over the phone. "I can no longer ethically represent Marcus in light of information that has come to my attention, and I believe the family deserves to know the full extent of his criminal exposure." Sterling's revelation was devastating and comprehensive. As Marcus's attorney, he had been inadvertently facilitating money laundering and tax evasion for years, believing he was handling legitimate business transactions. When he finally realized the true nature of Marcus's activities, Sterling had conducted his own investigation to determine his potential liability. Marcus has been using attorney-client privilege to hide evidence of criminal activity, Sterling explained to Margaret and me during an emergency meeting in his office. "I have documented proof that he murdered David to prevent exposure of his embezzlement scheme." My blood ran cold as Sterling presented evidence I never could have obtained on my own. Marcus had hired a professional mechanic to tamper with David's brakes, paying him with funds from one of his offshore accounts. Sterling had discovered this information when Marcus asked him to defend against wrongful death claims from the mechanic's family after the man died in what was supposedly an unrelated accident. The mechanic's widow found documents in her husband's belongings that implicated Marcus. Sterling continued. "She brought them to me thinking I could help her understand their significance. When I realized what they revealed, I knew I had to come forward." Sterling turned over financial records showing payments to the mechanic communication logs proving Marcus had contacted the man shortly before David's death. And most damning of all, a recorded phone conversation where Marcus threatened the mechanic to ensure his silence. The mechanic's subsequent death in a construction accident at one of Marcus's job sites was almost certainly another murder. With Sterling's evidence added to our existing documentation, we now had proof of murder embezzlement, bribery tax evasion, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Marcus wasn't just a white-collar criminal. He was a killer who had murdered his own brother to protect his illegal activities. The boardroom began filling with directors and shareholders at exactly 10 o'clock. Marcus entered with his usual confident swagger, clearly believing he was about to address minor concerns raised by his deceased brother's unstable widow. Catherine sat beside him, playing her role as the supportive sister-in-law, who was concerned about my mental health. Margaret called the meeting to order with unusual formality, her voice carrying none of its typical warmth when addressing her son. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here to address serious allegations of criminal misconduct that threaten the existence of this company and the livelihoods of our employees," she announced, stunning Marcus with her directness. I watched Marcus's face carefully as Margaret continued speaking. His confident expression gradually shifted to confusion, then concern, and finally to barely controlled panic as he realized this was not the simple family intervention he had expected. "Marcus, you are hereby removed as Chief Executive Officer of Harrington Construction effective immediately," Margaret declared. "The board has voted unanimously to terminate your employment and revoke all access to company resources and facilities." The color drained from Marcus's face as he processed this information. "Mother, what are you talking about? This is insane. Sarah's accusations are the delusions of a grieving widow who doesn't understand business operations." Detective Thompson chose that moment to enter the boardroom accompanied by 2 FBI agents and a representative from the district attorney's office. Marcus's shock was complete as he realized the full scope of what was happening. "Marcus Harrington, you are under arrest for embezzlement, bribery, tax evasion, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder," Detective Thompson announced, reading him his rights while the federal agents placed him in handcuffs. Catherine's scream of shock and denial filled the room as she watched her brother-in-law's arrest. She turned to me with wild eyes, finally understanding that her dismissive treatment of my investigation had been a catastrophic miscalculation. "Sarah, what have you done?" Catherine cried. "This is our family. You've destroyed everything over some misunderstanding about business practices." Margaret's response was swift and final. "Catherine, your husband murdered my son David and stole millions of dollars from employees who trusted this company with their retirement savings. Sarah didn't destroy this family. Marcus did when he chose greed and violence over honor and integrity." As Marcus was led away in handcuffs, he looked back at me with pure hatred in his eyes. "You have no idea what you've done, Sarah. You think you've won, but you've just destroyed Jamie's future along with everyone else's." His threat only strengthened my resolve. I had protected my son by ensuring that the man who murdered his father would face justice, and I had protected hundreds of employees by exposing the theft of their pension funds. Thomas, who had been sitting quietly throughout the meeting, finally spoke up. "Dad, I gave Sarah the information she needed because what you were doing was wrong. I became a lawyer to uphold justice, not to help criminals escape consequences." The meeting concluded with Margaret announcing that the company would cooperate fully with federal investigators and that all stolen funds would be returned to their rightful owners as part of a comprehensive restitution plan. Elena would be granted immunity in exchange for her testimony, and Thomas would continue working with the company to help rebuild its reputation and ethical standards. As I left the building that morning, I felt a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying finally lift from my shoulders. Justice was being served. My son was safe, and the truth about David's death would finally be revealed. The storm clouds were beginning to clear both literally and figuratively. 6 months later, I stood in the courthouse listening as the judge sentenced Marcus Harrington to 35 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. He had been convicted on all charges, including 2 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of David and the mechanic who had sabotaged the brakes. The evidence had been overwhelming, and his legal team's attempts to claim mental illness or business stress had failed completely. Catherine had filed for divorce within weeks of Marcus's arrest, claiming she had been unaware of his criminal activities. While this was likely true, her years of cruelty toward Jamie and her dismissive treatment of my concerns had permanently severed any possibility of reconciliation between us. She moved to Florida with her teenage daughters, selling her share of the company to Margaret for a fraction of its actual value. The financial restitution process had taken months, but every stolen dollar had been recovered and returned to its rightful owners. The employees' pension funds were fully restored with additional compensation for lost interest and emotional distress. The city had recovered all funds stolen through fraudulent contracts, and new oversight procedures had been implemented to prevent similar corruption in the future. Margaret had surprised everyone by asking me to serve as the company's new chief financial officer, a position I accepted after careful consideration of how it would benefit both Jamie's future and the employees who depended on Harrington Construction for their livelihoods. Under new management, the company had not only survived the scandal, but had thrived by implementing ethical business practices and innovative construction techniques. Elena had been promoted to deputy CFO, and her expertise in financial systems had been instrumental in rebuilding the company's reputation with clients and regulatory agencies. Her daughter had started college as planned, with her education fully funded by a scholarship program Margaret had established for children of company employees. Thomas had evolved from a reluctant ally into a trusted family member and business partner. His legal expertise and genuine commitment to ethical practices had made him invaluable during the company's restructuring process. More importantly, he had become a mentor and advocate for Jamie, encouraging his engineering interests and providing opportunities for him to observe construction projects firsthand. Detective Thompson's investigation had expanded far beyond Marcus's crimes, ultimately exposing a municipal corruption network that resulted in indictments for 12 public officials. His thorough work had ensured that justice was served not just for David's murder, but for all the taxpayers and employees who had been victimized by systematic fraud. Jessica Walsh's investigative reporting had won a Pulitzer Prize for exposing government corruption, and her articles had prompted legislative changes to increase transparency in municipal contracting processes. She had become a close friend and had helped me navigate the media attention surrounding the case while protecting Jamie's privacy. But the most meaningful changes had occurred in my relationship with Jamie and our extended chosen family. Jamie's confidence had bloomed as he realized that his dreams were not only valid, but were actively supported by people who recognized his exceptional talents. He had completed the university engineering program with honors and had been accepted into an accelerated bachelor's degree program with full scholarship support. The sustainable community center he had designed as a class project was actually being built as part of the city's revitalization efforts, with Jamie serving as a junior consultant on the project, despite his young age. The irony was not lost on me that my son, whom Marcus had dismissed as worthless, was now contributing to construction projects that would benefit thousands of people. Margaret had become the grandmother figure Jamie had never had, encouraging his interests and sharing stories about his grandfather's engineering innovations. She had also legally adopted him as her heir, ensuring that David's son would inherit his rightful place in the family business, regardless of what happened to me. On the one-year anniversary of Marcus's sentencing, I organized a celebration dinner for our chosen family. Margaret Elena and her daughter Thomas Detective Thompson Jessica, and several other friends who had supported us through the investigation and trial. As we sat around the table sharing stories and laughter, I reflected on the journey that had brought us together. Jamie stood up during dessert, holding a small wrapped gift that he presented to me with a shy smile. "Mom, I wanted to give you something to thank you for believing in me when nobody else did," he said, his voice strong and confident in a way that would have been impossible a year earlier. Inside the package was a framed architectural drawing of a bridge design, but not just any bridge. Jamie had designed a memorial bridge incorporating sustainable materials and accessibility features, with a plaque dedicating it to David Harrington and all the dreamers who inspire others to build a better world. "I'm going to build this someday," Jamie announced to the table. "And when I do, everyone will know that dreams matter, and that people who are different aren't less than. They're just special in ways that some people can't understand yet." The table erupted in applause and tears, and I felt David's presence as strongly as if he had been sitting beside us. The bridge Jamie had designed wasn't just a construction project. It was a symbol of resilient justice and the power of chosen family to overcome betrayal and cruelty. As our guests prepared to leave that evening, Margaret pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Sarah, I need you to know that what you did took extraordinary courage," she said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You could have remained silent to protect yourself and Jamie from potential retaliation, but instead you chose to fight for justice regardless of the personal cost. David would be so proud of the woman you've become and the man you're raising Jamie to be." I hugged this remarkable woman who had chosen justice over family loyalty, knowing that our bond was stronger than blood relationships could ever be. We had created something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. A chosen family built on mutual respect, shared values, and unconditional love. That night, as I tucked Jamie into bed, he looked at me with eyes full of contentment and hope. "Mom, I'm glad Uncle Marcus went to prison," he said matter-of-factly. "Not because I wanted him to be hurt, but because now I know that people who do bad things have to face consequences, and people who do good things get to build beautiful futures." His simple wisdom reminded me why every difficult moment of our journey had been worthwhile. We had not only survived betrayal and loss, we had transformed our pain into purpose and our trauma into triumph. As I write this story now, 3 years after that first terrible family dinner, Jamie is thriving in his engineering program and has already received job offers from multiple construction companies who recognize his exceptional talents. Our chosen family continues to grow stronger, bound together by shared experiences and mutual commitment to supporting each other's dreams. Sometimes people ask me if I regret exposing Marcus's crimes, knowing that it destroyed relationships and changed our lives forever. My answer is always the same. I regret that it was necessary, but I would make the same choice again without hesitation. Protecting my son and ensuring justice for David's murder were not optional. They were moral imperatives that defined who I wanted to be as a mother and as a human being. The most important lesson I learned from this experience is that family loyalty should never require accepting abuse or covering up crimes. True family, whether biological or chosen, supports each other's growth, protects each other's dreams, and stands together for justice even when it requires personal sacrifice. Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace and standing up for what's right? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes sharing our experiences helps others find the courage to fight for justice in their own lives. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life drama with powerful endings. And don't forget to share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that dreams are worth defending no matter who tries to tear them down. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to let cruel people define your worth or limit your possibilities. Keep building your bridges and never let anyone convince you that your dreams are too big or too different to matter.